Hi, my name is Michal Luria. I'm a researcher at the Center for Democracy and Technology, and today I will be talking about a paper called Co-Design Perspectives on Algorithm Transparency Reporting, Guidelines, and Prototypes. We began this research project with a question in mind. What is algorithmic transparency in practice? There has been quite a lot of work about transparency and explainability, and researchers have defined a range of principles, guidelines, and frameworks for both transparency and explainability, and those were intended to help practitioners. However, recent work shows that there is still a gap between those principles and being able to implement them in real-world products. And so we attempted to address that gap. We did that through a two-part human-centered co-design research project. So we took a design research approach here. We focused specifically on social media recommendation algorithms, as these are so significant in defining what it is that end users end up seeing and consuming in their everyday life. We also focused on global transparency reports, so a designated area where people could see information about an algorithm. And the reason is that recent research has shown that there is a need for this holistic high-level overview. Not every piece of information is attached to a specific mechanism or a specific piece of content that people see. And so having a particular space where people can come and get a more general idea of how an algorithm works on social media would be particularly valuable. So the study had two sessions. The first was a foundational value finding session. This was an evaluative stage of the study where we attempted to form a foundation of what everyday users care about and what they would want to see. We attempted through this stage to create practical guidelines on what would be included within a recommendation algorithm transparency report. In the second session, we took a generative approach. We created 4 prototypes to try to identify and explore a range of opportunities for interaction with algorithmic transparency reports. And then we brought those prototypes back to users to reflect on the tangible expressions of their own ideas from the first session. So if we go back to the first session, we had a total of 30 participants. These were everyday users, so casual users, not heavy creators. And we attempted to recruit a diverse sample of genders, races, political orientations, technical orientations, and educational backgrounds. In the procedure, we had 3 design activities that we asked participants to go through. The first was a card sorting activities, where we asked participants to organize a long list of questions that platforms could answer in a hypothetical transparency report about how their algorithms work. And we asked them to organize it on a scale between most important for me to know about and least important for me to know about. As participants were organizing these notes, we asked them why did they place a particular card in a particular area, or why is one card placed higher than another, and so forth. We had several of these card sorting activities, and we followed with a sketching activity in which we logged off and allowed the participant about 5 to 10 minutes to imagine what a perfect version of a transparency report would be to them. So we gave them this empty template with some graphical elements that they could put on the report and suggest some things that they would want to see there. Here are a couple of examples of what participants came up with. And lastly, we showed participants excerpts from actual privacy policies that social media platforms have up on their website, and we asked them about the information that they see. What is useful in that information? What is missing? And how would they change the information that is being provided? For the second session, we went out and spent a few months creating prototypes of what a recommendation algorithm transparency report could look like based on our findings from the first session. Now, these are not intended to be a template of what an algorithmic transparency report should be, but rather initial ideas of the different directions that these reports could take. And we came back to users with these prototypes and used experience prototyping to explore what are the different elements of the design, what is useful, what isn't, and so forth. And you can read more about our design process in the paper. For the second session, we had 16 participants, and these were all participants from the pool of participants in the first session. Let's take a look at a couple of the prototypes. This prototype presents a plug and play feature where we wanted participants to be able to explore the relationship between input and output of an algorithm. Even if this was in rough terms and wasn't specific, it seemed that participants would want to have some idea of the relationship between input and output, as usually it is reported on separately. So in this plug and play feature, participants could play around with the input information that is being entered into the algorithm and to view some of the changes that would happen in the types of content that they would see. Another prototype that we tested is a prototype where participants could learn more about how their personal data is being shared across different platforms to serve a range of recommendation algorithms. Here they could not only observe these different characteristics, but also to control some of them and to move the different information types to categories such as publicly available information and all the way to data that platforms will never share with partners or other platforms. We had 3 categories of findings in our paper: content, presentation, and language, and I will discuss the former 2 in this presentation. So a couple of things that people wanted to include and exclude from algorithmic transparency reports. The aspect that participants cared about most, and this may not be surprising, is the personal data that is being used to feed a recommendation algorithm. Participants wanted to know exactly what information is being collected about them and inferred about them, and how it's being fed into the recommendation algorithm. They wanted to know why also, and they wanted to know whether that data is being shared with external partners and whether they have control. Even if they don't have control, they still wanted to know that. In terms of what to exclude from an algorithmic transparency report, participants were less interested in how an algorithm works and for whom it was designed. They believed that this information would not be very useful to them. They might not understand it, or it's just not as interesting as other aspects. That's not to say that this information should not be shared at all, but rather that specifically for this crowd of end users, these are not the most important things that they would want to see in a report about the recommendation algorithm. For presentation, there were several aspects that made their experience significantly more positive. The fact that the prototypes were very visual and interactive was key to making this information digestible to participants. Having interactive aspects also allowed them to stay longer within the report, play around, and learn. Participants also particularly appreciated that many of these reports were personalized, and so that they included their personal information. Now, this is not necessary in every report, but having some personalized information was more engaging and allowed participants to connect to something that is familiar and that they've learned about from their own lived experience. And lastly, participants wanted these reports to be controllable, at least to some extent. In many cases, it wasn't enough to just understand what is happening or how things work, but participants also wanted to have some control over these characteristics and to be able to change things around according to their preference. To conclude, in this work, we contribute insights about how platforms could provide recommendation algorithm reports to casual users through both guidelines and prototypes based on our 2-part co-design study. Now, our study is just a starting point. These are initial directions that platforms could take or explore in their own platforms, but they should also continue the conversation with users, with their own users, as well as other stakeholders, to really find what are the ways in which they can bring the most value to their users. I would like to thank my collaborators on this work, both within the Center for Democracy and Technology and outside of it. And I invite everyone to take a look at the paper for more information. Thank you.